Three, two, one. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the What's That Major podcast. Thank you for those coming back, and if you're new, welcome. I'm your host, Vanessa, and today I am joined by Thomas Foland. Thomas has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Nova Scotia College of Art and Design from Canada, a Master's of Art History from the University of California, Riverside, and a PhD in modern slash contemporary art history from the University of California, Los Angeles. Very educated man. Thomas is currently
Yes.
Thomas is currently an associate professor of art history, and I have been given the great honor of interviewing him. So, Thomas, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa, for inviting me.
It is my pleasure. So, first of all, before we get into anything, what is or how would you define the study of art history?
The study of art history is really a study of visual culture, you could say. We look at objects in the same way that historians look at text of the past. So if you love ancient culture, if you love learning about other cultures, art history is a really great, it's like a gateway, we could say, to uh,
Mm-hmm.
a kind of fascination with cultures near and far, past and present. But mostly it's visual. It's all about visuality and looking at the built environment through visual form.
Mm-hmm. And what moment did you realize, okay, this is my calling? How did you know that this was the right path for you to pursue?
Well, I was always artistic, even from a very young age. It's funny because I used to, even before I could write or read, I would pretend to write. My parents actually bought me this blackboard, and so I would draw, and I had cousins who were in grade school. They were older than me, and I was fascinated by their lesson books. And I would see these words, but I didn't know what they meant. I was two, I think, or three. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had this blackboard. I would actually pretend to write, but I would only make waves. And then and I always remember looking at like newspapers, and I was always fascinated by images. And I loved looking at images, TV, advertising, and that's going to translate it into drawing. And then I was a voracious reader when I was very young. And it was always taken for granted that I was going to go to art school. My parents always said that I was artistic and I should go to art school. And I think what they didn't realize is that I was also a writer. My parents weren't very academic or very literary. And even though I did a lot of reading, I don't think they recognized the extent to which I was as much as an artist at that point as a writer. So when I go to art college, that's when everything sort of starts to fall into place. I was lucky to go to a really good art college.
Mm-hmm. So going into um, going into the whole school system, what was the demand like for this major while you were in school? Was it competitive in any way, or were you able to find it easy to go into it?
Well, here's the interesting thing. It was on the one hand, it was kind of terrifying for me because it was also new.
Mm-hmm.
Like I left a very small town in East Coast Canada to go to what to me at that point was a big city. It was Halifax, Nova Scotia. I went to the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, and so on the one hand, there was a lot of I think first year students in college always have a lot of anxiety and fear about a big shift in their life, right? And I'm
Oh
always
yeah.
trying to work with our first year students to just kind of help them with this transition. It's a big transition, but it's also an exciting transition because
Mm-hmm.
you are now a young adult and you are coming into your own. And so I really approached it with a sort of a mix of both trepidation, fear, and really excitement. I was lucky because I ended up at an amazing art college. It was so exciting to be there. It was very competitive, but it was competitive in a way that made me want to. be better.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also very exciting. There were a lot of these amazing artists from New York that were doing classes at the art college I went to, and there were a lot of really cool art type people. Like, there's a kind of a kind of personality that you see in art colleges, and
Mm-hmm.
my art college was art and design, and so they always said there's two types of people, right? There's the design people who look a certain way, and then there's the art types who are very outgoing, and they're very out there, and they're very fashion forward. And so that was interesting and really fascinating. Just the whole environment. It was really creative and really exciting. And I mean, I really loved it. I loved school at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I still love school. I mean, I've really never left school except for the time I was working as a curator at a
Mm-hmm.
museum.
Yeah. So, you also you brought up that you went to Nova Scotia, which is in Canada. So,
Like,
I'm very interested as to know how the I guess the academic system was in Canada compared to when you went to the UC system and how that differed.
well, that was there was a difference of time because I was out of school for a while before I went back to do graduate study.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, because it was an art college, the emphasis really was on being creative, and we were great at really. I mean, well, here's the thing. The one thing that hasn't changed is the way that I think professors teach and the way that they grade students. That's never changed. We there's a lot of changes in terms of how education is administered, but the one thing that's constant is that you're always assessed on what you learn. And so for me, the difference between undergrad and graduate work was um, not really not wholly a big difference. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I had moved to, even though it was a different country. I immigrated to the United States at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it wasn't a huge transition. I always encourage students to go to graduate school because I think it's well, the difference between graduate school and undergraduate, if I understand your question correctly, is school, you have a lot more freedom and independence.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like a working environment in many ways because you're pursuing research.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there are some people who choose to educate themselves through the CSU system or a private university, but you decided to choose the UC system. Is
Right.
there a specific reason why, or was it just something?
I wanted to go to the UC system because, well, first of all, I wanted to live in Los Angeles. That was a big factor. And I had done after my undergraduate work, I had studied in New York through the Whitney Museum. They have an independent study program in art history, critical and curatorial studies, and studio. So I did that, and I wanted a different experience. But also, there were people at UCLA that I wanted to work with. There are certain professors that I was really, and this is the thing about graduate school, you really want to choose somebody that you want to work with. And I worked with Amelia Jones during my MA, and then I worked with George Baker and Stephen Nelson at UCLA, and they were all professors of modern and contemporary art history.
Mm-hmm.
So the UC system, it's big.
Yeah.
So I will say, thinking back to what you'd asked me a few minutes ago, the one thing I did notice was that it is a huge university, and
Yeah.
you can tend, not as a graduate student so much, but as an undergraduate student, I noticed that you can feel lost as an undergraduate student. We TA'd for classes that were 300 or more students, and
300?
yes,
Whoa. Oh my
well,
gosh.
UCLA's intro lecture courses are for undergraduates are massive lecture rooms. There's about 300 students, I remember, and there were about 10 of us that were TAs, teaching assistants for as graduate students. You work as a teaching assistant for the professor, and so we would have sections. Then we would, after the lecture, at some point there would be hour sections with about 10 to 12 of the students or more I guess it would be up to 30 if it was a big 300 class, if there's 10 TAs. But anyway, you would have work with a small group of students in section, and that would be the only time that students would have a more personal or intimate interaction with each other and with their professor or TA.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was the one thing I noticed even as a graduate student that was quite different from undergraduate. Was it was it's a big state school as opposed to my undergraduate was a liberal arts college, so it was a 4-year degree program.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily private, but it wasn't necessarily public either. It's a little different in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. So also, another question about that. So you went straight into the 4-year program, whereas most of the students here, sometimes they go to, a community college. Can you tell
Right.
me what that was like, and if you wish you would have went to college first before going straight into the 4-year program? Because there are some, at least for, I guess maybe it might be different because you were in Canada, but there are some, that go straight into university, and sometimes they can't handle, that dramatic shift in educational wise, and they end up going to community college.
Right. Well, you know what I think is unique about California, and had I grown up in California, I probably would have done this. Um, I would have started at a community college and used that to transition to a university because we exist in California as essentially feeder schools for the Cal States, the UC's colleges and universities, and really a host of other places. I think it's a unique system in California, and it's a really great one because it really does help prepare students for what sometimes can be a fairly overwhelming experience. Had I gone to UCLA as an undergraduate from my hometown in Macadam, New Brunswick, I don't think I would have survived.
Yeah,
Um,
I can probably attest to that too, because I went to Gardena High School, which is, near the beach, but I don't
that's good.
think I don't think I would have been able to handle going from, Gardena High School straight into maybe like a CSU or something. I probably
Right,
would have like overwhelmed myself. So I am, kind of thankful in a way that we do have these community colleges where we can get an understanding of ourselves and figure out what we want before we, go into that 4 year. So,
right. No, I think it's excellent for that, and it's also community college also is just, to me, it's a really important model because it is based on the notion of a democratic form of education, in
mhm,
the extent that we want to, this is the basis of community colleges. The community colleges really were originated in order to give communities, everyone, access to a university class education.
mhm,
And I think that's a really important model, and it's something that I'm always really arguing for. Uh, is for us to not to look at community colleges as lesser than a university or lesser than a college, but really as a good community access to education. A
mhm,
number of our students, as I'm sure you know, don't have the resources that many other people have to get into more elite colleges and universities. And a community college is really, I think, an excellent uh, model, both in terms of a feeder school to university, but also as an end in itself. There's a
mhm,
lot of people that come to community college that are what we call lifetime learners. They want to take classes in painting, or they want to take classes in history or literature, French, and it's just a really great way to, I think, extend education to communities that might not otherwise have access to it.
mhm. Yeah. So, why did you decide to do a PhD in modern and contemporary art history rather than any other art history specialization? So, what drew you to that?
Well, I'd gone to an art college initially as an undergraduate, and my first encounter with art was contemporary art.
Oh.
And to me, it was really exciting. We
Mhm.
were working with living artists that were practicing and teaching, and it was to me was just, I mean, I loved ancient art and modern art, but my focus was modern and contemporary because I felt like I knew that best.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to New York to study through the Whitney Museum, I wanted to be a curator of contemporary art.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it was really, it wasn't even ever a question for me for some reason. I never really thought about specializing until later when I went to a PhD program. Um, but at that point, I had a number of years of experience working with artists at museums and galleries and writing about contemporary artists. And I was very well trained in contemporary art and theory. And so when I went to UCLA, my goal was to study 20th century modernism. That's really what I'm a specialist in.
Mm-hmm.
But I teach all areas of Western art from ancient to the present. But all my writing and research is based in 20th century now, modernism,
Yeah.
not much contemporary anymore.
Yeah. So I also see that you went to a independent study program at the Whitney Museum of American Art. So can you tell me what that is and what was it like?
Well, that was pretty crazy, and that was pretty exciting, I have to tell you, because
Hmm.
it's a pretty remarkable place. They only take about 25 students per year, so
Oh,
it's really.
wow.
I was very
Hmm.
lucky to get in. I still don't
The
know how I got
stars
in.
aligned, right?
Right, they certainly did. Um, I had applied there after I finished my BFA, and it was the only school I applied to. It was the only
Hmm.
thing I was really interested in, and I also went to live in New York. So really, my educational path on this is determined by cities I want to live in. So lucky so far, right?
I'm
I thought,
seeing a trend here.
yeah, that is, and I'm seeing a trend now too. So I wanted to live in New York, but the Whitney Independent Study Program is a very famous school. It trains curators, and many famous curators now have come out of that program, but also many famous artists have come out of the Whitney Independent Study Program. So
Mhm.
I felt very lucky that I got in. I was very blessed. It was a very special place. And it was really an opportunity at that point to live in New York and be around artists and be part of the Whitney Museum. So as these young budding curators, we actually curated an exhibition at the Whitney Museum with their collection.
Oh, wow.
I remember we met with the director one time of the museum, and he says, "Make sure you use all this, this great art we have." And I was
Hmm.
thinking, is this for real? Is he really? I mean, I said, I'm like 24 years old and I'm
Hmm.
at this meeting with a director of one of the biggest American art museums in the US. And he's telling us that we can have any of the artworks in the Whitney's collection to use in our exhibition. And so we did. And it was just very exciting.
Hmm.
Contemporary art is particularly, at that age, it's just in New York at that time, it was a really exciting time.
Hmm.
um, and so I really just felt like I was on this great roll, and I still didn't know what I really wanted to do at that point, I have to tell you. Well, at that point, I really had sort of decided, okay, I'm not going to be an artist. I like writing. This goes back to what I was saying earlier when I was very young. I like writing about art. So I was able to combine these two sort of separate interests because I've always done a lot of reading. I've always read a lot of tons of literature. I still do. I'm constantly reading novels, and I read a lot of art history, but I do a lot of fiction reading. And so writing about art for me and curating art exhibitions was a way to meld these two interests that I'd had since being very young, writing and visual culture, studying art. But even at the Whitney program at that point, I really was trying to like, figure this out. Like, can I make a living? I didn't come from a wealthy family, so I was
Hmm.
thinking, can I make a living as a curator?
Yeah.
Can I make a living as an art critic?
Yeah.
I was lucky enough I got a job at the Contemporary Art Institute in Toronto after I finished that program. So right out of school, I was an assistant curator of contemporary art for
Hmm.
3 years.
What was that like?
Well, that was
Going
pretty,
going back.
well, that was so entering the work world,
Hmm.
which was a big shift. So I left my hometown of Macadam, went to an art school in Halifax, and then went to New York, and then suddenly I'm in Toronto, another city. I didn't actually want to move to Toronto, I have to say, but I moved there to get the job. I
Mhm.
ended up loving Toronto and have a lot of really great friends there. Um, but it wasn't really my plan at that point. But I got this great job there, and it was really a great learning experience, and it made me realize one thing is that we can teach you so much in college, but in terms of skills, you learn that on the job.
Yeah.
In other words, what we really need to teach students in college is critical thinking, being able to express themselves, being able to write, being able to analyze, being able to think.
Mhm.
Skills are great, but in my case, what I learned at the Whitney Museum was how to conceptualize an exhibition, but I didn't really learn how to install it or how to mask the wall to hang artworks. I learned that on the job. And then
Mhm.
we had an installation crew, of course, that was part of this was one of the benefits of working for a big museum. But suddenly I found myself working kind of a 9 to 5 job at a museum, and it was an adjustment, but it was great. It was really wonderful experience. I met a lot of artists. I did some traveling as part of my job, and I got to curate exhibitions. And the one thing I didn't like was that I felt that I had to do a lot of. This is sort of my complaint even today about teaching is that I have to do a lot of administrative work sometimes, and
Yeah.
I had to do a lot of administrative work as a curator, and I didn't have enough time to do writing because as well as organizing art exhibitions, I was supposed to write about them for and publish catalogs, and that always took a lot of time in terms of the research and the writing. And so that's one of the reasons why I left that and ended up teaching,
Mhm.
because teaching for me was really a way to be able to continue my research, and teaching helps is part of my research. Really, you can't really teach something unless you really know it well,
Yeah.
and that in turn fed my writing.
Yeah. So being, a art history major, were you ever given the opportunity to study abroad, or was that just something that was kind of to the side to you?
Well, there were we my undergraduate course had an off-campus study program.
Mm-hmm.
I actually took a semester off and went to Europe. I had saved up some money with a good friend of mine, and I remember we went in the fall. We got Eurorail passes. I don't even know if they have those anymore. I'm sure they do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we got backpacks, and I remember we put Canadian flags on our backpacks, because one thing I remember we learned was that in Europe they don't really like Americans. So we thought, okay, well, we're going to make sure everyone knows we're Canadian, because people love Canadians everywhere in the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? But Americans are not that well loved in
Yeah.
parts of the world. I hate to tell that to Americans, but many of them don't know that, but it is true. But
Yeah.
anyway, put our Canadian emblems, Canadian flag emblems on our backpacks, and we traveled all through Europe, and we looked at ancient art a lot. We made all these pilgrimages to. I remember I went to the Parthenon in Athens, and I have photographs of all that, and I incorporate those now into my lectures. So
Oh,
when I
wow.
yeah, when I teach Greek art and architecture, I show students my some of my pictures from that period. And I
Mm-hmm.
have a picture of me among the ruins of the Parthenon,
Mm-hmm.
wearing this like bright red sweatshirt, as I recall. So we did have an off-campus study program. I didn't use it. I did kind of my own.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those are great. That's another great thing about study abroad programs, is that they really are, you get firsthand knowledge and experience
Yeah.
with. We don't have one on our campus at Mission College. I know some of other colleges do, and I have friends and colleagues in other colleges, like Cerritos College. I think ELAC has a study abroad program where you can go to Italy for 6 weeks in the summer as part of a course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I my first college was El Camino College, and they had a few abroad programs, and it was pretty cool. I didn't go to any, but they were pretty. interesting. I would have definitely been down to go to one of them if I had the opportunity. Um, so coming out of um, the undergrad and going into, your master's and your PhD, I also saw that uh you have a thesis for your master's and a dissertation for your PhD. So can you
Mhm.
kind of tell me the difference between the two?
Yes. Well, the transition from an MA to a PhD is really a transition in terms of skill development. So at a master's level, to complete your MA, you do a number of coursework, a number of courses as part of your coursework, and you must write what's called an MA thesis, and that's a selected topic that you choose with your advisor, and you do the research on it, and it's really like a short version of a dissertation.
Mhm.
Uh, a dissertation is a much longer research project that's the next level. And it involves, sometimes people spend up to 3 to 5 years research and writing their dissertation. And really at a
Whoa.
PhD level, that's mostly what you do.
Yeah.
Uh, is you do some coursework, but a lot of it is TAing, being a teaching assistant at the
Mhm.
university, and doing your own research, and you attend some graduate seminars, and a lot of that's field work. So as part of your, depending on what you study, you can travel, and it's part of your, as I say, it's part of your research. I have a good friend that did her PhD in Indian funerary architecture. And so she lived in India for a number of years and learned Urdu and Hindi, and um, wrote her dissertation on that topic. My dissertation was on Robert Rauschenberg in the 1950s in New York. So the only real fieldwork I did was, well, I got a pre-doc fellowship to study at the Archives of American Art in DC at the
Mhm.
Smithsonian Institute. So I
Oh,
lived in DC.
nice.
So that was my sort of my abroad trip, was across the country to live in DC for a year and work at the Archives of American Art. But that's really the difference. It's really about a cumulative process in terms of um, learning steps. We could say you start off with an MA and a thesis, and you kind of learn the ropes. And then when you write your dissertation, you kind of know the layout and how to approach that. You just do a larger version of that. And then a dissertation is really, in many cases, the roadmap for a book that you will
Mhm.
then publish after graduate school. So it's really training you to be a writer as an art historian.
Yeah. So, okay.
And
Uh,
graduate school is different, of course, for different fields, I should say.
uh-huh.
I speak about my own field in art history, but um, that's how it is in art history.
Yeah. So, okay. I want to make you feel a little old. So, you got your master's in 2003
Yeah,
and your PhD in 2010. So,
yeah.
when you got your PhD, I was about 9 years old. So, um, have you, throughout teaching and throughout your job experience, have you noticed a big change within the art history field in good ways or in bad ways?
Are you talking about in terms of teaching or just in terms of art itself, the field of art history?
Yeah, kind of both. How teaching it has changed, how the art within art history has changed.
Mhm. Well, a couple things. By the way, thank you for not mentioning when I did my undergraduate, because that would make me feel really old, but you didn't. Don't even look. Oh, well, I'm happy with the 2003, 2010, because anyway. But to answer the other question, there's a couple things, and there's a couple ways I could answer that. Yes, art changes constantly.
Mhm.
Um, when I was doing my MA, this was around the time when there really was a shift in the way we study the history of art, and that shift had a lot to do with changes in the larger culture concerning the way we think about the relationship between the Western industrialized world and then the rest of the world. We're really talking in a sense about a relationship between these kind of imperialistic countries
Mm-hmm.
like the US and Britain, and how they have always essentially monopolized the study of art history. Because when I was doing my undergraduate, the really art history, and even in my MA years, art history was very much a kind of you could call it a colonial sort of enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
It was, in other words, England and the United States studying the art of other countries, many of them they had colonized. And there was this kind of Euro-American tradition, a cultural tradition that was set up that privileged antiquity, ancient Greek and Roman cultures as being the pinnacle of civilization. And everything else was somehow lesser, like Mesoamerica was lesser, right? In
Mm-hmm.
this view, African art was lesser. And the most advanced, important, again, in this view, kind of art was only the kind that had a classical background. That all began to shift in the 2000s with the emergence of what we call globalism now, right? And
Yeah.
so the center, which used to be New York was the center of the art world for many years. That center fell apart. There is no center to art anymore. We live now in what's called kind of the global contemporary. So if you go to any of these international exhibitions, like the Venice Biennial, which are these international art fairs, or the Sao Paulo Biennial, what you see is art from around the world, from various places, Asia, Africa, South America, contemporary art.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no longer this idea that one country has a monopoly upon culture.
Yeah.
It used to be the US, and then before that it was Paris, and then before that it was Italy. But the connection there, right, of course, is that it's all Euro-American. So that has all changed. And I think
Yeah.
that's a really important shift, because what that tells us is that, and this has gone on in tandem with all sorts of other, I think, political changes in terms of how we think about other cultures now, right? How we think about identity, how we think about gender, how we think about issues like queer and trans issues. All of these have really changed the way we see each other, the way we look at world culture. Um, and they kind of have gone hand in hand in some ways. I mean, art history used to be the domain of essentially privileged white heterosexual men studying Greek and Roman antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
Women weren't part of it. Um, uh, Other cultures, like non-European cultures, weren't part of it. So
Yeah.
all of that has really, as I say, changed over the last 20 years or more, which I think is great because we have diverse student populations.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if I came to Mission College and was only teaching like how great Roman art is. Roman has nothing to do with their lives, right? Or students.
Yeah.
Uh, or if I only spoke about art as this, the work of great men, right? The
Mm-hmm.
whole idea of like geniuses in art history. I do this exercise in my class with students where I ask them to write down the names of three geniuses that immediately come to their mind. And then after we reveal the names and we realize that, oh, this idea of genius is really this kind of Western idea. It's a Western idea that's focused predominantly on men in the 19th and from 15th to the 20th century, really.
Mm-hmm.
Famous white men. Why are only famous white men geniuses? Why only white men geniuses? And that's because there's a bias built into the very idea of genius. And so this is another example of how I think the study of culture and history has changed and how art is part of that. In terms of teaching, I've noticed that, well, I have a lot of views about education, but one of them is that I think that we don't value education in and of itself anymore as an important experience. I think we are, I think in a lot of cases, we're so focused on completion, on getting students to transfer and degrees, and we've forgotten what an education really is.
Yeah.
I think, one of my big sort of issues is how we commodify education. We turn it into sort of a for-profit model when education is not a for-profit business.
Mm-hmm.
Education is a public mandate to train critical thinking participants in to be part of democratic institutions. That's the goal of public education.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm always fighting that. There's a lot of battles in many ways to fight. I think in terms of education, that being one of them, but another is really changing the field of art history and just humanities in general itself, getting it away from these old imperialistic sort of biased models, and this gives students, I think, greater access, and I think it helps students see art and art history as part of their lives when we can connect it more.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So what what were some classes that you remembered, whether it was in your undergrad or your master's or even up to your PhD? What were some classes that you enjoyed, and what were some classes that you kind of disliked, but you still had to take these classes?
I remember there was a couple. I think one of my most memorable experiences. Well, it's funny because I'm still friends with the librarian at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design,
Hmm.
and I remember he and I worked at the library part time as part of my undergraduate. It was sort of like a work study that I did, and I remember he always had this. What do you call those things you put in your desk with a quote on it? It's like a not like
A
a
plaque?
paperweight, a plaque, right? So I had one of those little plaque on his desk, and it was a quote from Marcel Duchamp, who's this very famous French artist in the early 20th century. And Marcel Duchamp had worked as a librarian at one point in Paris. And the quote was, "I was always happy to provide any information to anyone who politely asked for it." Signed, Marcel Duchamp, librarian. And I, for some reason, always loved that quote. And it was because we don't think about Marcel Duchamp as a librarian, we think of him as an artist.
Hmm.
So that was on John Murchie, who was the librarian, his desk. And John Murchie himself is an artist. So in terms of a class, though, a course, I remember an art history professor I had who taught 19th century American art history. And I remember her, I still remember her like it was yesterday. She she, a lot of energy. She would come to class with this large Pepsi and a straw. And the very first class that she announced to the class, she goes, "Before we start, I just want to tell you that I am a feminist and I'm a Marxist. And my course will reflect that, how I teach this course." And I remember thinking, I love that. It was so passionate. So I studied with a German art critic, and also he became a very famous art historian. He teaches now at Harvard. His name was Benjamin Buchloh, and
Hmm.
he took art very seriously, and he was really a brilliant educator. And I was enthralled. I was intimidated as hell by him, but I was also just in awe of him because he had such a grasp of theory and concepts, and he had such confidence, and he spoke with such passion about art, as did my other professor, Vivian Cameron, I believe was her name,
Hmm.
and who had announced that she was a Marxist and a feminist. And so these were the professors who really impacted me, because I realized they have such love for what they're doing, and um, they made art history so interesting to me,
Hmm.
and so relevant and important and impassioned and really political. And in that sense, it was part of life. And it wasn't just the study of beauty. It was something much more important. Um, I remember an artist named Martha Rosler came to NESCAD and gave a speech to the graduating class. And I remember she started her speech with a quote from somebody who was important to her when she was a student. And I think the quote was, I was just thinking about this the other day, in fact. I think she said she wanted to thank so-and-so for, I think something like teaching her about the beauty of thought brought to bear upon art,
Hmm.
something like that. And again, looking at art as an intellectual enterprise, as well as a creative one, and also looking at it as part of a political part of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. That
So those are very formative early experiences for me in terms of studying art history.
yeah. That's that's a lot to take in because I guess because I'm doing engineering for my major
Oh yeah.
and it's all very, I don't want to say robotic, but it's very logical. It's very analytical. We need
Right.
the answer like, oh, this and this equals that, and that's it. There's no feeling, there's no
Right.
emotion to it. So you get these, these like socially awkward individuals coming out of the university sometimes that don't really like know, like, I guess their artistic side and just, oh, it's all logic. And
Right.
I think that's also another good thing why we have colleges too that, have us take these art requirements too so we can be
Right.
more well-rounded in, dealing with people. So,
Right.
um I am thankful for
Good
that.
to have exposure to
Yeah.
different fields. I wish I had more really when I was in my undergraduate. I didn't really know a lot about anything other than contemporary and modern art. And,
Hmm.
I sometimes wonder, would I have chosen a different topic, a different field? Would I have been more of a 19th century specialist or a, I don't know, medievalist? But
Yeah.
but yeah, exposure is really important for students to other fields and other disciplines. This again is why I am sometimes a little wary when we try to streamline education too much, when we try to force students into a path. We want to make sure that we allow some create. I mean, those are important, but we also want to make sure we allow room for creative experimentation because college, your undergraduate years, really that's the time to really be able to like screw up and figure out what you fall down and get up again, figure out what you want. You want to make those mistakes then, but you need to be able to make those mistakes, and you
Yeah.
need to be able to experiment with to find out really who you are and what you want. Because I remember too, those are formative years for a lot of young people. They don't really know who they are yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, they have to work on, their maturity coming out of high school. So that's that's also where it comes into because I definitely needed that
Yeah.
maturity boost. So, okay, now we're going to get into past the schooling, and now you're just starting your very first job with, your degree.
Mhm.
Can you tell me what that was like? And did you get that job while you were still in university or once you got out? And what was it like?
Well, I had this is the same job I mentioned earlier, but I had a very after I left the Whitney Museum study program, I had sort of a grim year because it was during a recession, and the job world was not as bountiful as one would have hoped, and particularly in the art world. And I
Yeah.
had heard though, I'd had a friend that had come visit New York when I was there, who had mentioned that there was this museum that was opening in Toronto, a new contemporary art institute as part of the Harborfront development in
Hmm.
Toronto. It's going to be a major um, contemporary art institute in Canada. And so I remember thinking, oh, I want that job. I could. They were going to hire an assistant curator, and she was had been working there at the old space as they were transitioning to this new space. So that took a while for that to happen. I remember. So it was a rough transition. It's one of those. Have you ever seen that movie Reality Bites?
I haven't seen
It's a
that
really
one.
great movie. It's really a great movie about the post college experience.
Hmm.
It's about a group of students who leave, they graduate and then they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. And it's really great. I really recommend it. It's a really wonderful movie. It kind of reminded me of my sort of my year after the school ended and the Whitney program in New York. And I was trying to figure out, I had no money. I was working as a waiter and uh, off and on, and trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was trying to do some writing, and so it was a rough transition. But I always tell people that if you really love what you do, if you're really committed to what you do, you're going to make it work.
Hmm.
And there's nothing worse, I think, than doing something solely because you feel you're supposed to or you have to. I always tell students that it's really important to find what is your real calling and take the opportunities when they arise to really pursue that. because it does pay off in the end.
Yeah.
And so it was a rough transition. And, as I said earlier, it was a rough transition into like a 9 to 5. We had some flexibility. I mean, I wasn't like nailed to a desk, but it was a structured job, and that took some adjusting. But and some people are better at that than others. I don't think I've never been a 9 to 5 kind of person. I have a very what's the word, erratic work sort of schedule. Uh, and I like that as teaching, I can change my schedule from semester to semester.
Yeah. So throughout your work experiences, whether it was working in the museum or, even, to this day, how are you how did you find your strengths and how are you still finding them today?
That's a good question. How do you find your strength? Sometimes it's keeping your eye on the sort of the prize, as they say, to use that cliche. Um, I think it's always important though to take some time uh, for yourself. Um, Surround yourself with positive people,
Hmm.
and I think though, if you love what you do, nothing is going to get in the way of that. If you're really committed and if you love what you do, um, you just need to. What is that line from the Finding Nemo? Just keep swimming. That
Yeah.
just saying, just keep swimming, just keep
Yeah.
swimming. I think that's really just the way to go about it. Just keep going. There's always going to be a lot of setbacks. I've had a lot of successes in my life, my career, but I've had a lot of setbacks too. There's a lot of things I applied for that I didn't get. There's a lot of jobs I applied for I didn't get. I've had some great, I've had some dream jobs, and then I've had some less than dream jobs, and I've, had opportunities that have been wonderful, and other times I haven't. It's important just not to become frustrated by that, and to have persistence.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
those would be my advice.
How would you say all these educational and all these work experiences have helped you become the person that you are today?
I would say that, let me think about that. How has it helped me become the person I am today? Um, I've had a number of very different experiences, and I think being well-rounded is important,
Hmm.
particularly in the world we live in today. I've had experiences in many different places. Before I taught at Mission College, I had worked at a number of different, I'd been a curator, I'd worked at a number of different schools, I'd worked at universities teaching. Um, so having all of that, I think, different experience, and having a lot of life experience, I think um, I think it's made me a well-rounded person, in that I feel like I can relate to people
Hmm.
in a way that I may not have earlier, when I had a more narrow view of the world. I think it's made me a good educator.
Yeah.
Um, and then, of course, the biggest thing is age. Age helps you a lot. Getting older helps you actually um, see things
Hmm.
that, it's kind of like with history. It's funny, as you age, you get there's truth in the idea of age and wisdom, because you do see things more broadly. But exposing yourself to different experiences is really important. I think become a well-rounded person, and to make you who. I don't really know who I am today, honestly. I'm the same person I've always been, honestly, but I'm just
Hmm.
a little easier in certain ways to be with, and more confident perhaps than I used to be. I used to suffer from a lot of um, well, I had lack of self-confidence when I was much younger. I didn't realize
Yeah.
how good I was at what I did. It took me a long time to really learn that. But I'll tell you something. This might not be this is not well, maybe this is sort of inspirational. It's sort of not. But here's the thing, and I think this is good advice for anybody, especially when you're a young student. Don't let anybody tell you that you're not good at what you're doing. If you think you are, just keep doing it.
Hmm.
If you believe in yourself, uh, then that's the most important thing. Because when I started to have, early on in my career, when I started to have some success, I started to notice that there were people who were not happy that I
Yeah.
was, and those people tried to uh, undermine me.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking at the time it was me, right? And it took me a long time to realize that it's not me, it's them. So I think that's probably the most important life lesson to learn, is that you're not going to have everybody, not everyone's going to support you. There are going to be people that will, of course, and those are the people to focus on, but not everyone's going to support you. And there's going to be times in your life when people are going to be jealous of you for whatever reason. At school, in the workplace, I've had workplace colleagues who have tried to undermine me. And so I think that it's always important to keep your head focused, to keep your head in the game and on the prize, and just learn to just accept that that's going to happen. Don't let it take away from you or your sense of accomplishment as a
Yeah.
student. Even students with, like, there's professors that will tell students that they're not good enough, or they don't think that they should pursue certain paths. I had that myself as a student, and I would never let it get to me. I would ignore it and just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think, it's important to believe in yourself. And that's something that takes a long time, I think, to learn.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I can definitely relate to, having not a lot of, confidence when I was younger, but now I have a bit of overconfidence where I'm too proud of myself, but
Overconfident is
I'd rather have
bad.
that. I'd rather
Yeah.
have that than, no confidence at all, right? So,
Take it until you make it, as they say sometimes.
yeah. Um, so what were some of your proudest accomplishments, getting all these majors aside, from getting them?
I think for me, I always loved the fact that I was able to publish my work, my writing. I've always been very happy to see, like, my work, my writing on art published.
Mm-hmm.
It's always made me very proud. Even today, every time I publish something, it's always kind of a thrill. There's a writer, Cynthia Ozick, she calls it the lust for print. I think print lust. To see
Mm-hmm.
something in print is such a good feeling. And I just
Yeah.
finished a couple of things just recently that are going to be published soon, and it feels good. It's a nice sense of accomplishment. So I'm very proud of those things. I think just, finishing anything is an accomplishment. I think so many people leave things unfinished and regret it, and I always really try to encourage my students to finish anything that you start.
Yeah.
Just get to the end. It's either get to the end of that workout that you're going to do at the gym, that you said you're going to, spend an hour at the gym. Just do it. Don't do 30 minutes and give up. Finish that paper, finish the course, uh, really just complete your goal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that itself is a great enough accomplishment.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna get into a little bit of the bad. Because
Oh,
obviously when, you have good, there's always gonna be some bad.
yeah.
What was one of the biggest mistakes you made while at work or in school, and how did you bounce back from it? And do you have any advice to those who have made mistakes in school or at work, and how to bounce back from it?
Well, let me think. Here's the thing. I think maybe I have a different answer to that than you might expect, but I sometimes think that mistakes are part of the process. Uh, I, I think one point in my undergraduate um, college, I dropped out for a bit because I felt overwhelmed, and I just felt I couldn't cope. I was very overwhelmed. It was a lot, and I remember that was in the first year or two, and but then I bounced back pretty quickly. But I remember almost kind of running away and feeling hopeless and lost, and I picked myself up and went back. And but I don't think that was a mistake so much as that was part of the process. So I always, even when I have students that I've had a few students that have failed a course and they feel terrible about it. And I would say, it's not the end of the world. It's everyone. I failed my first art history course,
Yeah.
in fact, I ever took. Do I feel bad about it? No, not at all. Because I realized that I just wasn't ready. I wasn't at that point where I could do it. And it was funny because I remember thinking, and I tell this story to my students. I went to the library the night before the final exam, and I cracked open the massive Janov's History of Art, which is this massive book. And we're thinking, I'll just study all night. And about 3 hours into that, I realized I'm not going to be able to do this.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. This is my first semester. I was so self-conscious about the whole thing. I went to the exam and I took the blue book, as we call it now, or whatever, the exam tablet, and I sat there and you'll think this is crazy, but I pretended to write an essay for like the hour that we were sitting there. I just pretended to write. It was again kind of almost going back to what I used to do when I was like 2 years old, when I was pretending to write. Because
Yeah.
at that point I didn't know how to write, but now I knew how to write, but I had nothing to say. So I pretended to write this exam for an hour, and I remember handing it in to the professor, who looked at me like I must have lost my mind, or that I had just given him some sort of conceptual art sort of
Mhm.
project, like a blank essay. But anyways, I failed that, and it was like it was a little devastating at the point, but I felt like a failure. But then I realized later, once I went back to it, that it's not a big deal. I don't
Mhm.
think we should look at mistakes as bad things. I think we should look at them, or failures, as bad things. What's that? What is that saying that uh, the only way to succeed is to first fail.
Yeah.
Never attempt to do anything, you'll never succeed.
Yeah.
You can avoid failure by never trying, but then you also avoid succeeding. Um, but yeah, there's a number. I mean, as I say, it's really part of learning and growing up, and it's part of college experience for many students. There's going to be setbacks, and there's going to be an occasional failure, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that you don't let that stop you,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Don't give up.
Yeah. Yeah, I have started to realize that too, because, first, the very first semester that I took while, we were in the pandemic, I only passed one of my classes, and the rest, all the other three, I just completely failed and I had to retake them. And
Right.
it was pretty hard because I went from getting always A's and always B's to now getting, B's and C's and, sometimes an F, and it
Is
was
that
it
my
was
class?
hard.
Pretty
No, it
normal.
was it was um it was philosophy, it was critical thinking and composition,
Oh, okay.
and trigonometry. Those two
Wow.
I just completely bombed, and I was like in complete shock, and it just like my whole confidence just went like boom, and I was like,
Yeah.
no. But I slowly started to realize, I can just take that class again. There's always a
Yeah.
second chance. And I think that's a good thing too about, the school, is that you have that opportunity to redeem yourself in that class
Right.
and take it over again. So now, like, if something like does happen in class, I don't sweat it as much because I can just take it again. um
Right.
there's not, too much to think about anymore, so I just, do what I have to do, and it all goes, from there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
before we go,
Resilience is
yeah,
the key.
yeah, before we go, I wanted to ask you another question. So, how do you feel like you have contributed to society with art history major? Because we all contribute to society in very different ways. Like,
Right.
there are some people that major in engineering or sociology or nursing, but we're all contributing to society.
Right. Well, I think in two ways. I think the work that I've published, I think to me is my contribution to
Mm-hmm.
the field of art history, and my contribution to looking at art within society. Um, And the second way that feel like I've contributed to society is through my teaching. I love teaching, number one, and I love spending time with students. And I think it's always really important to be honest and personable with students, and to give them a window onto the world, like an honest window into the world they're going to enter.
Yeah.
And I feel like education was a lifesaver for me. And it was an incredible experience. And it's that kind of experience that I want to bring to my students and to my teaching. And I do feel I've done that. I feel like I've done that with a number of students I've had over the years, who many of them I've stayed in touch with and who have gone on to do other great things.
Hmm. So, okay, another question before we go. How or where do you publish your work?
I
Or is that
There's a
like
couple of
top
different places.
secret?
No, it's not. Well, no, that would be bad if it was top secret, because nobody would know.
Yeah.
The last article I published was in the last big one was in September in a British art history journal. So I published in a lot of art history journals. Well, not a lot, but I published in the last three I've done have been in. My first one was out of grad school, was the Art Bulletin, which is a American art history journal. And then I wrote an article for Modernism Modernity, which is actually an interdisciplinary literary journal. It's published by the Johns Hopkins University Press. And so these are peer review major research papers. And the last one was, as I said, at the UK Journal of Art History. I also write, though, for Smart History, which is a subset of Khan Academy, which is the online public access textbook for a lot of people. And Smart History is the art history portion of that. Art history provides content to Khan Academy, and I'm a contributing writer, and I'm always publishing stuff on Smart History. And a lot of these are things I want students to know about. So I will write about artworks that I think are necessary to help round out curriculum. And then I assign these to students as part of their readings, along with a number of other Smart History readings. And then I just did a book review, actually, for a French cultural journal. So a lot of these are academic. Well, there's two. There's the art history. Smart History is a site for public art history. So it's got a very democratic, populist mandate. And then I write for them, and the tone I use for them is a little different than the one I use for these other more sort of Tony academic journals like H. France or Modernism, Modernity, etc. Really, those two different sort of areas for worlds.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for coming on and being interviewed. It was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one. So, bye.
Thank you so much. This has been really great.